Okay, so we're good to go. All right. My name's Chad Payne. I'm an alcoholic. Um, I appreciate you guys having me come out and do this. I love to do this. I love to dig deep into the big book. I love to talk about the 12 steps. Um, I I love this program and I love what I get out of it, and I love seeing what others get out of it. It's fun to do this together and everybody kind of grow and experience freedom that so many of us never. Not only did we never know it was available, we never even knew it existed. So it's a lot of fun to get to do this together. So I appreciate getting to be here with you guys. My job here is to talk about the third step, and from what I understand, you guys are a book study and you like to get into the big book, and that's what I'll do. That's what I'll do today. I'll tell you just a little bit about me first, and I don't want to get into this too much because I want to leave plenty of time to go. There's a lot of material on pages 60 to 63, but I will tell you this: I came here. I didn't show up in AA because I'm self-centered. I didn't show up in AA so that I could turn my will and my life over to God. I didn't show up to develop any kind of relationship with God. I came here because I had a serious problem with alcohol. I had a couple of problems with alcohol. The first problem is an alcohol problem, and what that is when I start to drink, I lose control, and I suffer a lot of consequences. I don't know what's going to happen next. Things get bad. I usually have a plan going into it, and the plan usually doesn't work out and really backfires, and I kind of burn it all to the ground. And I hurt a lot of people along the way, and I lose all dignity and self-respect. And I mean, I'm the guy that I didn't show up with anything. I lose it all. You don't have to have done that to be an alcoholic, but that's my experience. And I had my first surrender to alcohol a few years before I got sober, and what that surrender looked like is I realized that I could not manage my drinking. I could not control my drinking. It was way out of control. So my first surrender looked like this. Okay, it's bad enough. I'll quit. People have been telling me to quit, and I agree. I will quit drinking. And then that brought on the second problem that I have with alcohol, and that's the problem that comes up when I try to quit. And I can quit. I can quit drinking. I know I can. I've done it hundreds of times. The problem is staying quit. I'm not able to stay stopped. And if it was bad enough last time, and I really make a firm commitment, and I change the people that I'm around and the places that I go, and I really make those big changes in my life, I might last a couple of weeks. If not, I probably won't last a day. But either way, I don't last long when I try to quit. And those last couple of years of my drinking, I rarely could last a whole day when I would quit. And so what was happening is I was quitting almost every day and then starting back. So not only am I powerless over alcohol once I put it in my body, but the really tricky part about alcoholism is I'm powerless over that first drink. The book says that I don't have an effective mental defense at all times. It says at certain times I don't have an effective. At certain times I do. At certain times I can just say no. I can exert my willpower, firm resolution to stop, avoid my triggers or whatever, stay away from those people. I can do that at certain times. Um, but at certain times I can't. At certain times, those mental defenses are not effective, and that's the hopelessness of alcoholism. Because once I start, I can't stop. So every time I start drinking, things go real bad. Well, that's not the only thing about alcohol. Is not only is my condition hopeless, but it's also progressive. It just gets worse, and sometimes it looks like it might be getting a little better, and then I really I take one step forward, two steps back, and things go really really bad this time. Build it up, burn it down. And but the other thing about alcoholism is it's fatal, and I'm still standing here today. It hadn't killed me yet, but I was on the path, and I can tell you, I like the way that the book describes what some of us call a spiritual death. I believe it's on page 25 where it says we've got two alternatives. One is to go on to the bitter end, the blotting out the consciousness of my intolerable situation. That's such a great description of what the last few years of my drinking looked like. You know, there I was going on to the bitter end, blotting out the consciousness of my intolerable situation as best I could. The other alternative that I was faced with was to accept spiritual help, and that's what happened for me. Through it's not wasn't the plan, but I ended up in a little treatment center. They took me to some meetings. I started going to meetings. I went to a lot of meetings. I got really involved in the fellowship. And my whole recovery was based on going to meetings. But I didn't just go. I went early. I stayed late. I got involved. I chaired meetings. I set up chairs, cleaned out ashtrays. I hung out with sober people. You know, I did all that stuff they were telling me to do, get in the middle of the herd. And I did that. And about a year into this, I was sober, but I was still very sick and I was ready to leave. I'd had enough of you guys. And after all, I'd been sober almost a year. And obviously, you know, I wasn't going to drink again. And this was working just fine. I didn't really thank you very much for the help and I'll go on my way. And I met a guy. I met a guy from out of town. He showed up and I was gonna have, you know, a real quick conversation with him after the meeting. And that conversation turned into about a 2 hour 12-step call where he 12-stepped me almost a year into sobriety. And he explained alcoholism to me based on his experience. And I knew that it matched my experience. But what he helped me to understand was the hopelessness of my condition. And I knew I was in big trouble. I knew that I was about to walk away from the program that had kept me sober, or excuse me, I was about to walk away from the fellowship that had kept me sober, and I was going to drink again. And I knew it was coming. And then he said something very profound to me. He said, I think I know what you need. And I said, what's that, Dave? What do I need? And he said, I think you need a spiritual awakening as a result of the 12 steps. So that was one of those moments where you're like, oh, that's what they've been talking about, you know. And we embarked on this journey. He took me through the steps. Now, I want to fast forward a little bit. At about 5 years sober, I had been doing AA the way it was passed on today by word of mouth. I moved down to Austin, Texas at about 5 years, and I met Charlie and Katie and got to sit at the table with Mark Houston. And this is always the part of the talk where I say, if you get nothing else out of this, if you've never listened to Mark Houston, find some talks that Mark Houston has done and listen to them. And Charlie and Katie, you know, if you're really into this third step stuff, they've got some great stuff. I don't know of anybody that has anything better on the third step than Charlie and Katie do. Anyway, I got with them, got involved in Primary Purpose Group, and we got into the big book in a way that I had never been into the big book before. We started studying the book, and they started explaining it to me, and I started doing what it said, the way that it said to do it, and I started having an entirely new experience that changed my life. We talked about making all our amends. So we went out and did that, finished up all those amends, even the ones that my previous sponsor had said, don't worry about that. And I learned something. I really learned how to break down the first step and explain that to a new person in a very systematic, simple way using my experience. And that's a game changer when it comes to helping alcoholics. I learned about going deep and being really consistent with the specific instructions on steps 10 and 11, and really seeing how far can we go with this. And I learned about actively going out and carrying the message. You know, I was one of those guys who would sit in the home group and wait for the newcomer to come to me, and I never had more than one or two sponsees at a time, maybe none. And I told them when they told me that's not the way to do it, I said, no, I told them what I had heard. This is a program of attraction, not promotion. And they said, well, Chad, you're right about that, except that's the 11th tradition, not the 12th step. That's our public relations policy. Our 12th step philosophy is, look, there's alcoholics dying out there who need your help. Go get them. and then you'll experience what this program has to offer. So I did. And ever since then, for the last 15 years, I've been really active in carrying this message. So I've been sober since April the 2nd of 2003. That's 20 years. I'm very grateful for that. Do have to admit, I thought I'd be further along by the time I had 20 years. So if anybody out there is feeling that way, I understand. Um, and I have a home group, a local home group that's really my real home group here in New Jersey. It's called Design for Living. We meet on Sunday nights in Neptune. But I also have an online group that I'm very active in, and I see some familiar faces here from that group. But we're called the Primary Purpose Group online, and we study the big book very slowly, line by line, and we try to leave our experience out of the share as much as possible and really focus our discussion on the text. And it takes us almost 3 years to get through the first 164 pages. So we go really deep with it. So if you're interested in that, I'll make sure my email address is in the chat at some point. Send me an email and I'll get you the information for that. Okay, so now, the thing that really changed things that I learned once I got into Austin, got into the big book, the third step up until that point, for me, the third step was a decision and a prayer. And it was pretty simple, pretty straightforward. It was a decision and a prayer. And the third step is a decision and a prayer. But if you're just reading the steps off the wall and you're just reading specific passages out of the book, like for instance, the third step prayer or the ninth step promises, or just certain pages that people pull up in meetings all the time, well, then you can miss a really important part of this. And what is it that's so important? Well, it's the failure of self-will as it's laid out here on pages 60, 61, and 62. And that's what I want to get into. And the reason this is so important is because I find out in step one that I've got this hopeless, progressive, fatal illness called alcoholism. I find out in step two there is a solution. It's a spiritual experience. And then I find out here on these pages in the third step, I find out that I can't have a spiritual experience because I'm blocked. I'm blocked. And these blockages, my attempts to live life on self-will, are keeping me spiritually asleep. And if I can become aware of this stuff and get free of it, well, then I can become spiritually awake. And that's what we're going for in this spiritual awakening. So on page 60, they give me the ABC, which is summing up steps 1 and 2. And then the book says, being convinced. We were at step 3. Well, being convinced of what? Steps 1 and 2. Like if you don't have a good grasp of alcoholism and the solution, well, then we're not ready for this yet. I need to make sure that the guy I'm working with has this. So if I'm convinced that now I'm at step 3, and what is this? Well, it's that we decide to turn our will and our life over to God as we understood him. Well, if you're like me, maybe you've sat in meetings before and heard people say, just turn it over, Chad. Just let go and let God. And if you're like me, you're going, what do you mean by that? And what am I supposed to do? And that's what it says right here. Just what do we mean by that? And just what do we do? So they're going to spend the next couple pages here telling us what do we mean by that. And then they're going to give me steps 4 through 12, which are what we do. So the first requirement is that we be convinced that any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. Okay, well, not only am I not convinced of that, I don't even know what it means. So, Bill, you're going to have to explain to me what this means, this idea that any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. Now, I do know this much when I'm first getting into this. I know that my life, the way it was when I was drinking, is definitely not a success. And that was clearly run on self-will. But I'm going to need a little bit of help to understand that my life when I'm not drinking, run on self-will, can hardly be a success. And then I'm really going to need some help to become convinced that any life, like the way I hope my life can be as soon as I get everything arranged the way I want it, that life on self-will can hardly be a success. So if you're sponsoring me, you got your work cut out for you, is what I'm trying to say. Okay, so it says on this basis of self-will, on that basis, I'm almost always in collision with something or somebody, and I can relate to that. In sobriety, with when especially in that first year when I hadn't even touched the 12 steps, and then at other periods throughout the last 20 years, I find that I am in collision with something or somebody. The people around me, my job, AA, family, relationships, myself. I find myself in collision with all kinds of things. My financial situation, I mean, there's a lot of collision, right? But then I think this rest of the sentence is pretty important because it says, even though our motives are good. And I always feel like my motives are pretty good. In the moment, looking back, sometimes I can see my motives were a little questionable. But most of the time in the moment, I'm pretty convinced that my motives are pretty good. So he goes on to say, most people try to live by self propulsion. Each person is like an actor who wants to run the whole show. So Bill now is talking about the human condition. And that's one of the first things I realized when I was reading this. I know a lot of people who are really self-centered. And it's hardest to see it in me. It's harder to see it in me than it is for me to see it in you. But at the moment, Bill is not just talking about alcoholics. He's talking about most people, each person. 2 pages over, he's going to distinguish the alcoholic from the normal person, but we'll get to that in a minute. So what is it that each person's, well, each person's like an actor trying to be the director. That's what this description is. This is the director's job. The lights, the ballet, the scenery, the rest of the players, and the director knows how this whole show's supposed to go. But me as the actor, I don't know, but I think I do. I think I know how it should go. It says, if my arrangements would only stay put, if people would only do as I wish, the show would be great. Everybody, including me, would be pleased. Life would be wonderful. So that's the big delusion that I'm operating under, and it's gonna kind of blow some holes in this delusion later. But the idea that if I can just arrange life in a way that suits me, then I'll be okay. And what happens in that process is I don't even have a relationship with life anymore. All I have is a sick, twisted relationship with the way I think life should be. And I'm missing the whole thing. I'm missing life. I'm missing, but it's not just that I'm missing life, I'm missing the gift of life that God gives me on a daily basis because I can't see it because I'm so hyper focused on how I think it should be. And it's all I think about. And I don't know any different. I spend all my time thinking about how things should be in order for me to not have to experience any discomfort or any inconvenience. And that's the job that I've given my mind. I don't know when I did it. It was way back there, as long ago as I can remember, but somewhere along the way, I told my mind, I said, mind, arrange my life in a way that I don't have to experience any discomfort or any inconvenience. And my mind's been trying to figure this out ever since. And it runs nonstop. And it wakes me up at 2 o'clock in the morning and I'm mad at it. I'm like, just shut up, man. And my mind's going, you gave me the job. I'm just trying to do what you told me to do. And that's the state that I live in, this constant state of collecting evidence to prove my point, of arguing in my mind with anyone who might disagree with me. And they don't even know they're involved in an argument. They're miles away, and here I go, and that's just how my mind runs all the time. Unless I can do something to distract it. You know what distracts my mind really well? Alcohol. You know what else does? This thing. If I can scroll through this thing enough, I forget about all these. So you get the idea, but that's where I'm obsessed with the way I think life should be. In trying to make these arrangements, our actor may sometimes be quite virtuous. I think Bill put this in there for the nice guys in AA. You know, are there any nice guys in the room? You know, you're the ones that are like, I'm not selfish. I do things for people all the time. Okay. I know you do things for people. Let me guess. I bet that you're kind, considerate, patient, generous. You might even be modest and self sacrificing. Yeah. And why are you those ways? Is it out of virtue? Is it because you love God and your fellow man so much? No, 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 no. It's to get your way. Those are really great tools. Charlie told me that we call these the toolkit of self will. These are the tools I use to get my way. Now, if those things don't work, well, then on the other hand, I may be mean, egotistical, selfish, and dishonest. Whatever works. I mean, if you force me to pull out those tools, I'll do it. Right? So it goes on down to say, well, what usually happens? Well, the show doesn't come off very well. I begin to think life doesn't treat me right. I am the victim in my own story. Right? I'm the victim, and there's a long list of bad guys. I'm the good guy, and I'm the one that's mistreated. So when life doesn't treat me right, I decide to exert myself more. I become still more demanding or gracious, as the case may be. Still, the play doesn't suit me, admitting that I may be somewhat at fault. You ever hear people in AA say, yeah, I see my part. I see my part. So you wrote the inventory and you read it to somebody and you took it to God and you made amends, and that's what you mean by you see your part, or you just see your part? You know, because I think when someone says I see my part, here's what I want to say to them. Admitting you may be somewhat at fault, I bet you're sure that others are more to blame. And that's certainly the way that I look at things. I'm not going to be the guy to blame it all on you. I'll take credit for my little bitty part, but I'm sure that others are more to blame. So what happens? Well, I become angry, indignant. I'm indignant after all I've done for you. How could you do this to me? I'm self-pitying. What's the use anyway? Forget it. Why even try? So what's my basic trouble? Well, okay, if you want to know what I really am, here's what I really am. Really, I'm a self-seeker, even when trying to be kind. Remember back here when I said, even though my motives are good? Well, turns out actually I'm a self-seeker, even when trying to be kind. Yeah, I'll open the door for you, but you better give me a little nod of recognition. You know, I mean, that's a really minor example, but if I look at all the nice things that I've done for people throughout my life, my ego will take it just like that and run with it and say, well, you better get this in return. Or the ego was in it all the way from the very beginning. And the only reason I did it was to get something out of it. Yet I've got the people around me convinced that I'm being a nice guy until it doesn't go my way and it blows up. So then now the book finally admits that I'm a victim. Here's what it says. Chad, you're a victim of the delusion that you can wrest satisfaction and happiness out of this world if only you manage well. So this is the only time I get to be the victim in this book. I'm a victim of a lie that I'm telling myself, and I'm believing it. And what is that lie? Here's my interpretation of this line. If I can just get everything I want, then I'll be okay. And when I first thought of this line that way, I was like, well, of course, if I can just get everything I want, I'll be fine. But that can go two ways. The first way is I don't get everything I want and then I can't be okay. Well, that's not a good way to live. Second scenario is I do get what I want and then I'm okay for about 10 minutes. And then I need something else to be okay. And I love it when I get the 10-step call. Like for instance, I got a call from a guy and he says, Man, if my wife would just do some AA, I'd be all right. I'm like, okay, I remember that you said that. And I swear, a couple months later, he was calling me up saying, she's always on the phone with her sponsees and I need help. And I'm like, 2 months ago, you told me if she would just do AA, you'd be okay. And that's how I operate. I'm always needing something else. Yeah, this was good, but it just didn't do it. What's next? So it goes on to say it's evident to the rest of the players, these are the things I want. My actions make each of them wish to retaliate, snatching all they can get out of the show. In my best moments, I'm a producer of confusion rather than harmony. Why am I a producer of confusion rather than harmony? Well, because I don't even know what I want, much less anybody else. I'm constantly trying so hard to get something to go a certain way, and then I'm not happy with it when it does. And everybody's going, what is the deal with this guy? So he says that our actor is self centered, egocentric, centered around the ego. Everything that I identify with is what my life revolves around. And then he gives some interesting examples. And what I was told is that so many of us come in here and we have a very limited definition of selfish and self centered. We think it means like stingy or conceited. But what they're doing here is they're giving me some more examples of self centeredness. This retired businessman, the minister, politicians, and reformers, the outlaw safecracker, the alcoholic. These are all great examples of self centeredness. But he goes on to say most of us are concerned with ourselves, our resentments, our self pity. It's not that I think too highly of myself or I think too poorly of myself. It's just that I always think about myself. That's not really true. Sometimes I think about you. I think about how you affect me. And that's pretty much the extent of it. So now we get to the good part. Selfishness, self centeredness, that we think is the root of our troubles. Troubles, another, if I put more of a modern spin on the word troubles, it really means stress. I looked it up in the old dictionary and it says mental agitation, stress, or worry. That all sounds like stress to me. So, what causes my stress? Selfishness and self centeredness. But what is selfishness and self centeredness? Well, according to the last couple pages, it's me trying to arrange life to suit me. So my attempts to arrange life to be the way I think it should be cause me to be stressed out all the time. So I live in a chronic state of stress. And when we're stressed, our body has a response to that, a physical response. Part of that response is that I become focused on my own survival. So I become very selfish. Another part of that response, and imagine a primitive human, we evolved to have this response. It's called the fight or flight, or sometimes today it's called fight, flight, or freeze. It's a response to what happens when we're in danger. We have this stress response. Another aspect of this response is a focus on my external environment. So if you just take those two things, I become focused on myself and my own survival, and I also become very focused on my external environment. So something out here is going to fix this internal condition. Well, that's a pretty good description of self-will right there. And what's supposed to happen is we're supposed to have this response and then move through it and then come back to our base level and be. But many of us live in a chronic state of stress. So we become very self-centered. We lose touch with our innermost selves, and we're focused on everything outside of it. It says driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity. It's a cycle that I live in. I get scared because things aren't going my way. I get into delusion. I get this idea that if I can get this to go my way, then I'll be okay. Then I get into self-seeking. Now I'm going to figure out how to do it and start taking some action to get it done. And then I'm in self-pity because either it didn't work or it did work and I'm still not happy. And I live in that cycle: fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity. And that's where I live, back into the fear in that cycle. That's what a life on the basis of self-will looks like. And it's not that it's bad or wrong, it's just that I've got it backwards. What I'm doing is I'm trying to arrange everything outside of me to fix an internal condition. The message God's trying to get to me is, Chad, if you'll just deal with that internal condition, I'll handle the stuff outside of you. I got it. Because it turns out that my external environment, my circumstances, are always a reflection of my internal condition. It's spiritual law. That's the way it works in this world. I didn't know that. I always thought my internal condition was dependent on my external circumstances. And that's no way to live. And it's so wonderful to be able to live in a way today where I can be okay regardless of what's going on outside of me, and to know that it's really dependent on this internal connection. So what happens when I'm in this cycle of self-will? I step on the toes of my fellows and they retaliate, seemingly without provocation. Most of the people that I've hurt in my life were collateral damage. Now, I do not go make amends and say, hey, look, I didn't mean to hurt you. You were just collateral damage. I don't say that. But I do understand today that most of the people that I hurt, it's because I was trying to get what I need to have so that I can be okay. And in the process, I hurt somebody. And I've done a lot of damage based on that. A lot of damage, and just to be 100% transparent with you, I can tell you right now, my daughter, she's in her early 20s, and she's had to do some pretty intensive therapy, because she had a dad who was full-blown self-will and wasn't around the early years of her life. So I really do. I have a deep understanding. I mean, I can kind of laugh and joke and have a sense of humor about this, but there's a deadly seriousness to it too, because I don't ever want to go back and hurt people that way again. I don't want to live that way. Sometimes they hurt us seemingly without provocation, but we invariably find that at some time in the past, we've made decisions based on self, which later placed us in a position to be hurt. Charlie's, I'm getting a little emotional. Charlie, if you guys don't know, Charlie died. My sponsor of 15 years, Charlie Parker, died back in May, and I sure miss him. But he had said to me before, I told him what I was going to do, and he said, Chad, I want you to mark this date. Today is the day you're making a decision based on self, and you're going to call me somewhere down the road and tell me how this blew up in your face. And that I'm going to let you know that on this day is the day you made this decision that placed you in this position to be hurt. So it says, so our troubles, we think, are basically of our own making. I think that my problems are coming at me. And what this book is trying to get me to see is that my problems are coming from me. And I want to, I was just thinking about this, and I want to make this very clear. I've used a couple of examples that go back to before I got sober. But I didn't even realize self-centeredness until I got sober. Alcohol gave me a lot of relief from the bondage of self. And what I mean by that is as I was drinking, I didn't really care how life went. But when you took the alcohol away from me, I became pretty obsessed with how life goes. So many of us experience a much stronger case of selfishness and self-centeredness when you remove the alcohol, especially when we're living in untreated alcoholism. And I can also tell you, I've experienced some really painful failures of self-will in in alcoholism or in treated alcoholism where I'm really working a program, but I've got something that I'm holding on to and I won't let go of. And that's a recipe for disaster for an alcoholic. When I've got something that has to go a certain way and I can't turn it over to God because it might not go the way I need it to go. So I'm holding on with both hands and it's got to go this way. And that's self-will in sobriety. That's self-will in recovery. And thankfully, we have this work. And if I stay in this work and stay in this work and stay in this work, eventually I reach a point where I can let go. And often when I let go, I still get what I want. Or I don't get what I want, but I realize that I'm okay either way. It says here, now we distinguish now between the alcoholic and everybody else. What's different about the alcoholic? Well, the alcoholic is an extreme example of self-will run riot. So let's look at that. If you pull all the people and start plucking people out of the world, self-will run riot, self-will run riot, self-will, and you put them all over here. And then you look at this group and you say, okay, now who are the extreme examples? That's us. That's us. And if you don't think that's you, welcome to AA. We don't think it's us either. And it says it right here. Though he usually doesn't think so. Neither do I. Above everything, we alcoholics must be rid of this selfishness. When Charlie read this line to me, he said, above everything, we alcoholics must stop drinking vodka. I was like, Charlie, that's not what it says. And he goes, I'm just making sure you're paying attention. But it's a good point. Because if you were to ask me in early sobriety, Chad, what's the most important thing you got to do? I would have said, stay sober. But that's not what it says. Then later, if you would have said, okay, Chad, now that you understand this better, what's the most important thing an alcoholic of your variety must do? And I would have said, develop a relationship with God. But that's also not what it says. It says the most important thing that I must do above everything, I must be rid of this selfishness that we've been describing. I got to get free of this. And here's what I understand today. As I get free of self, God consciousness goes up. As self goes down, God consciousness goes up. As I get free of self, an agnostic like me has an experience with a God that I don't even necessarily believe in. And it's not based on going out and finding God. It's based on getting free of the self that's blocking me from my natural state of God consciousness. It says we must, or it kills us. God makes that possible. It doesn't say God does it for us. It said God makes it possible. Here's how God made it possible. He said, Bill Wilson, here are a set of 12 steps. I want you to put them in a book for all the future alcoholics, like this guy, Chad Payne, who's really a mess. He's coming in 1974. The world will be blessed with his presence there. Yeah. God makes it possible. And there often seems no way of entirely getting rid of self without working these steps. So I can try to wish away self-centeredness all I want. I can make a commitment. I'm not going to be a bad guy anymore. And I can't do it. If I'm not writing inventory, if I'm not praying and meditating, if I'm not being accountable with a sponsor, if I'm not making my amends, if I'm not working with others, forget about it. I'm going to be two things, selfish and asleep to it. I'm not even going to know I'm being selfish. So last thing I want to talk about over here, I know I'm running out of time. Last thing I want to say here is being all powerful, God, this is over on the top of 63. Being all powerful, God provides what we need if we stay close to him and perform his work well. I make a deal here. The deal is this, God, you give me what I need. Not necessarily what I want, because a lot of times what I want is in direct conflict with what I really need, because I don't really know what I need, but I'm counting on you to know what I need. So God, give me what I need. Whatever it is, I'll take it. And sometimes what I need comes to me in a difficult situation. And if I can walk through this difficult situation, it brings up things that are blocking me from experiencing God. And if I can work a program and walk through it, I can get free of some of that stuff that's blocking me. See, what I understand today is my spirit's calling for freedom. It's calling for it. The book back here on page 152 says, if trouble comes, cheerfully capitalize it as an opportunity. It's not on 152. I don't know what page it's on. Cheerfully capitalize it as an opportunity. 133, I think. Cheerfully capitalize it as an opportunity to demonstrate his omnipotence. If trouble comes, cheerfully capitalize it as an opportunity to demonstrate God's omnipotence. So use trouble as a chance to get free and demonstrate the power of God. See, God gives me just what I need to get free of these character defects. And I call them problems. God puts these situations in my life and I call them problems. They're actually opportunities. And how do I know it's what I need? Because it's what I'm getting. And God's all powerful and all knowing and all loving. So I'm getting exactly what I need to move to the next level of consciousness. What's my part of the deal? I can't change myself, but I can place myself in a position to be changed by staying spiritually fit. Stay close to God. Stay close to God and perform his work well. So my job just got much simpler. My job now is stay close to God, stay spiritually fit, and then use this state to be of service. And God provides what I need, whatever that may be. So we've got a prayer down here. That's a commitment. It's a commitment, something I don't know how to do. Okay, I'll stop being selfish. I'll turn everything over to God. I don't know how to do that. God, I'm going to trust that you'll open the doors for me as the time comes if I just make the commitment. And what's it look like? God, I offer myself to thee to build with me and do with me as thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of self, that I may better do thy will. Take away my difficulties, that victory over them may bear witness to those I would help of thy power, thy love, and thy way of life. May I do thy will always. Guys, thanks for having me.
Thank you, Chad.